Here.
Here.
Emily Gannon,
Here.
Nicole King, here. William Lysette,
Here.
Stephen Maud,
Present.
Mary Jo Reiner,
Here.
Priya Serene. Not present. Christopher Waya.
Present.
Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we can have a redo of the roll call, adding Dr. Serene. Do we have any visitor comments? Then we're going to move into the reorganization of the board. So I need nominations for a temporary president for the purposes of this reorganization.
I'll nominate Jeff Demick. Congratulations.
Are there any other nominations?
I'd say the last time I did this, I ended up in the paper. So I don't know if you want me to do it. Go smooth.
Any press at all is good press, Jeff.
Did not. Let us not repeat that.
It's not good.
That's going to happen anyhow.
So that is pretty normal.
Okay, if there are no other no other nominations, I need a motion and a second to close this. Okay, everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Okay. Yes, you may.
Okay, let's see. A little bit of legalese to start off. Our board policy number 005 states that the election of an officer requires the winning candidate to receive a majority of all the votes cast by those present and voting. Since there are 9 members present, 5 votes are necessary to win. If everyone present casts a vote. Our policy also states that if no one receives a sufficient votes on the first ballot, a runoff vote will be held between the 2 candidates who received the most votes in the first ballot. Do you have any questions from the members of the board about the procedures for tonight? Okay, seeing none, I ask for nominations for president to serve for a period of 1 year.
I nominate Mary Joy Reinhardt.
Are there any further nominations?
I nominate Jeff Dimick.
I think I decline that. Thank you. I appreciate that very much, Kyle. I'm a little too busy, I think, for the job, and I think Mary Joy would do well to serve again. I do have one question. Well, let me ask this first. Are there any other nominations? I would decline that. Thank you. Is there any other nominations? If none, let me close. I will have a motion to close nominations first. Do we have a motion to close? And a second from Dr. Serene. Thank you. Before we do that, my only question, I do have a question for the temporary, or the one nominee, Mary Joy. I do have a concern. In the past, we generally have rotated it. Would you be likely to only serve this one additional?
Yes,
year?
I would only serve one additional year.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's, I think, important, just for my vote. No, I'm not talking as the temporary president here. Then with that, we'll take a vote. I think a voice vote would work, especially since we only have one nominee. I think we can do a roll call vote, I guess, for that. Is that the plan? If we could conduct that, do I start? Are we doing it in order of the, does the president start that, or I'm usually in order, first guy to go anyway? Okay.
Nicole King,
Yes.
Priya Serene,
Yes.
William Lysette,
Yes.
Stephen Maud,
Yes.
Mary Jo Reiner,
Am I allowed to vote for myself?
Indeed.
Indeed, yes.
It's encouraged. Don't feel badly.
Christopher Whale,
Yes.
Emily Gaiman,
Yes.
Kyle Ganger,
Yes.
Jeffrey Demick.
Yes. And so I think the minutes will record that Ms. Reinhardt has been elected president for another one-year term. And at this point, I think we turn it back over to someone who's used to doing this, back to the former president, now president again. Thank you, Mary Joy.
Okay, so now we need to look at. Should I just talk loudly? Now it's working? Yes, okay. So we would like nominations now for vice president to serve for 1 year.
I nominate Bill Lysette.
Do we have any other nominations? Can I have a motion to close nominations? Second? Any further discussion? Questions? Okay, roll call.
Priya Serene. Aye. Christopher Whale,
Yes.
Jeffrey Demick,
Yes.
Kyle Ganger,
Yes.
William Lysette,
Yes.
Stephen Watt,
Yes.
Nicole King, Mary Jo Reinhardt,
Yes,
Emily Gaiman.
Yes.
thank you, Mr. Lysette, for stepping up. And we have with us this evening, I believe, District Judge Daniel Trexler, who will administer to the oath of office. So he wants to stand up. Okay.
Face your collar. All right, raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. Congratulations. Well done here.
Thank you, Judge. And as I mentioned, there's no need for you to stay around for the hour-long presentation. We're very, very grateful that you joined us and for all the support you give to Southern Lehigh School District, our students, and our residents. So thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
So, Dr. Trinkle, you have a lovely presentation for us. I understand that I think Dr. Mahan would like to
Well,
introduce.
I would only, I want to know, I'm contributing very little tonight, but other than to introduce Dr. Trinkle, I want to thank her for the tremendous effort she has put not only into tonight's presentation, but also into the devotion she exhibits to her work in support of our students. I want to acknowledge all of our principals who worked very, very long and hard, not only on this presentation, but in their daily roles as leaders in our district and in our community. A word that I sometimes use to describe our efforts and our people is restless. Restless in that we're very much aware of the good things that are happening, but very anxious and very much excited about making things better and making things better day to day, thinking about making things better when in the shower or whether they're driving home, to be deeply committed to this place and restless in our efforts to make things even better with respect to opportunity and achievement for students. And I want to also thank very sincerely our teachers. I was at a meeting this morning, which was really no different than any of the meetings I've ever attended. It was a group of teachers who were so excited and so engaged in the literacy effort that we're undertaking. Our current task is to select a core program. And the teachers, to the person, were enthusiastic, excited, engaged in ways that are just inspiring. And they too demonstrated restlessness in their desire to improve, to get more tools and more opportunities and more resources. So that's the context in which this presentation is offered tonight. And I want to conclude my introduction by offering, if I dare, a sports analogy to two Pennsylvania football teams, both named after birds. The first one being the Eagles, the second one being the Mountain Hawks from Lehigh. All right, both Pennsylvania football teams.
Where are you going with this?
I'm on the way. I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna land the plane. All right, and my point is about the dangers of comparing school districts, because just as we look and we see and we compare school districts, the Mountain Hawks and the Eagles are two Pennsylvania football teams, and if we compare them directly, say in a game, the Eagles can be doing lots of things wrong, and the Mountain Hawks could be doing lots of things right. Yet, if we simply compare numbers and final outcomes, that really is not a fair depiction. And so my note of caution is that we should not be comparing ourselves to state averages. All right. We should take no consolation in running up the score against the state average, because in our place, given our community and our teachers and our principals and our students, all right, that is about as valid as the Eagles comparing themselves against the Mountain Hawks in a game. And so part of our restlessness is to recognize that our goals are not set on state averages, but rather on being the best in Pennsylvania. So with that, Dr. Trinkle, here we go.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Pepe and I like to call this is the main event. This is why we're here. This is why we come to work every day. So, Mr. Pepe, this one's for you. So this evening, we're going to identify broad areas in our assessment outcomes. Is that better?
Yes.
A little bit. Oh man. This should be amazing. Okay. All right. So we're going to identify broad areas in our assessment outcomes, review trends, draw conclusions, but even more importantly, demonstrate how we formulated our actions in response to that. So where do we begin? So when we look at assessment data and attached to student outcomes attached to standardized assessments, I want you to consider a few things. We have so many students that have varying interests. They're artists, they're musicians, they're entrepreneurs, they're athletes. Many who of which received outstanding test results. Some who we have to instill a little bit more self-confidence and work with. All of our students are headed for great success, and no matter the score, we will continue to support them. So I want you to keep that in mind throughout this presentation. We continue to and have championed some of the fundamentals of literacy policy. It includes literacy coaches. It includes screeners that promptly identify students who may be struggling academically, early intervention, monitoring supports to make sure students are not just on grade level, but surpassing grade level work. We have a coordinated systemic approach to this work in reading with a mindset that includes a belief that all students can do this. And that will require full focus and full commitment. Our ELA core evaluation of our program is well underway.
That's why they don't let me have a computer. That's why they don't let me.
I can handle that distraction. I am happy. Don't count this as part of our time. Uh, So our ELA programming is well underway, evaluation of our core programming. We started that well into the summer. We briefly touched on that with a goal for implementation for next year. Yet in education, success is never final and reform is never done. So there's so much more that we still have yet to do. We're purposely reshaping our literacy instruction to reflect the science of reading. We're pairing carefully structured phonics with the support in reading skills to build content knowledge and even stronger vocabularies. With that, though, we recognize that our teachers will need the materials, the professional development, and the time to get all of this done. So tonight, I only will be providing you a very brief overview of the Future Ready Index. And that is really a comparison of what Dr. Mahan was talking about our performance across the Commonwealth. You'll receive a much more in-depth, detailed data set from your building principals. So as we move forward, you will see that there's a significant amount of information in this presentation. So if you have questions, jot them down and we'll get to them at the end. That way we can get through all of the data and hopefully maybe some of your questions that you may have might be answered throughout. So just to kind of set the stage for a few reminders, Keystone exams are given either annually or twice a year. Algebra 1 is in 7th and 8th grade through 10th grade. Also literature and biology at our high school. PSSAs are done annually, grades 3 through 8, with science only in 4th grade and 8th grade. When you're looking at some of the colors for the Future Ready Index, the blue means that student groups are exceeding expectations. When you see green, it means student groups are meeting the target expectations. And when you see red, it means obviously student groups are not meeting the expectations. Keep in mind, though, that in 1920, there were 2 exemptions for our Keystone assessments. Those were related to data samples, and you'll see that for biology at our high school, that there was insufficient data sample to produce a score based on the waivers that were given in 1920. The second waiver is for the Keystone course in 1920, and all of those calculations were exempt from the accountability. And those are held until the 11th grade year. So the 11th grade score is banked until their 11th grade year and then moved out of the Keystone scores.
People are looking, you meant 2020, right? So
1920,
or-
2019, 2020.
2019.
Yep,
Okay.
2019, 2020.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Yes, so all the way back, we're still seeing an impact on our scores from that year, from the waivers. And we could see that for a few more years to come, actually. PVOS data that you'll see weaved within this presentation is helpful, but it's only a single data point. And you should consider that when you see that up there on the screen. That PVOS data is looking at groups of students and groupings of students, not a single test or a single comparison to a single test score. Helpful for us when we're looking back at what could have happened, and helps us looking forward to make some projections in student achievement. It's helpful to know that those are projections and not predictions of student achievement. This is helpful in a general and a diagnostic way to see how programming is perhaps working for some of our different types of learners. We're constantly looking to see how we can assess for long-term academic gains while looking to make sure our students are not losing ground academically, which is why PVOS, Keystone, Future Ready, all those data points are only part of the story, which is why we also focus on MTSS, literacy instruction, structured supports and tiered interventions for our students, and also considering high achieving students who also need enrichment opportunities to extend further. Also keeping all of those things in mind in addition to looking at these data points. Dr. Mahan made a great comparison. We look at this information and we look at ourselves in comparison to like school districts, people that look like us with the demographic, the socioeconomic data, similar breakdown in schools, and we're faring out in comparison in some places very, very well. We're making gains where other schools are not. But we too have some focus areas. We have areas that we need to focus on, in particular at some of our elementary and middle levels, that we need to have a more strategic focus on so that we are surpassing those like school districts in student achievement moving forward. So we're going to begin with just the Future Ready Index, one data point, K to 3. So you'll see Hopewell and Liberty Bell. Hopewell, you'll see 62% of our students are scoring proficient or advanced in ELA. And while that's well above the state average, it did demonstrate that our 3rd grade did not meet the growth standard, which is why you see red. We are looking at that very closely. at multiple levels to consider anything that could have impacted growth in ELA at Hopewell. Conversely, though, in mathematics, we have nearly 72% of our students scoring advanced or proficient in mathematics, which is well above the state average. And you'll see Liberty Bell with almost an 82% of our students scoring proficient or advanced in ELA, and almost 84% of our students scoring proficient or advanced in mathematics, which is a growth from last year's assessment data for Liberty Bell. Moving to JPLIS, you'll see up there about a framework for attendance and career standards and benchmark. 97% of our students at JPLIS attend school. Our kids show up to school. That is an amazing percentage. Simultaneously, we're offering remarkable opportunities for career and exposure to career exploration. Yes, Mr. Dimming.
Can we wait to ask questions at the end, or can you ask questions during the presentation? Karen, I'm sure you can handle that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious historically whether we have always seen, and maybe don't know the answer to this. So I was curious though if the lower, appreciably lower ELA score, even at those schools to some degree. I mean, are they usually in the past have we seen lower ELA versus math, or are they about the same?
Our concern is the ELA at Hopewell. Fairly consistent otherwise, but that is not a traditional growth mechanism or growth standard for Hopewell.
Are those two things in most districts pretty similar? I guess my thought is just the difference between the math score and the ELA score.
You mean percentages?
Yeah.
I think while there's a difference there, those are consistent in what has been represented over time. And you'll see the principals go through that a little bit more specifically.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
Karen, can I just follow up real quick? And this may be for the principals, but that's a building index.
Building index.
So
yes.
I guess, is there more concern potentially with the third grade, with the fourth grade, with the fifth grade? Is there, I apologize. So is it more kindergarten? Is it first? Is it second?
It could be
Like,
all of them.
do we
Yes.
know
Now, the
in
cohorts
particular?
that we're looking at, we don't see a cohort grouping until we hit JPLIS
Okay.
because K to 3, it's only third grade that assesses. So there's no previous data from Keystones or PSSAs only that we can compare that to for a cohort comparison to see if those groups of students are achieving until they hit our intermediate school. Which is why we look at PBOS a little bit for some projections, but again, we only get that in third grade. So we use other assessments, K1 and 2 before, which you'll see a little bit through the principles to show what the other mechanisms we're looking at to get better prepared for third grade. Does that make sense? Anything else? So at the IS, we are seeing over 36% of our students scoring advanced in ELA, mathematics almost 32%, and science 63%. Again, all well above the state average. You'll see here in English and mathematics, we're in green, which is good. With over 79% of our students scoring advanced and proficient in ELA, and over 63% scoring proficient and advanced in mathematics. But the green isn't sufficient. That is not something that we would look at and say, okay, we're good, and not do anything to make an adjustment. We would want to take a look more closely to investigate how we can see an increased improvement there in those two areas. And then taking a look at science, at 92% of our students at the IS building scoring advanced or proficient. That is pretty exceptional, and a pretty exceptional data point there. Our middle school, again, reflecting strong attendance, showing a sense of belongingness here. As we know, when students feel and they're engaged and belong, they will attend school. And you're seeing that reflective and consistent thus far. Also seeing strong evidence for career exploration and development at our middle school as well. 30%, keep in mind too, at our middle school, we're providing PSSAs and Keystones. So we're doing two different assessment measures there, which is pretty much reflective in this data set that you're looking at now. ELA has almost 30% of their students scoring advanced, over 20% scoring advanced in mathematics, and 39% in science advanced. Again, ELA and science, we're meeting the growth standards in green. Those scores are very impressive at 79% in ELA with advanced and proficient, and in science, 72%. Although we need to investigate that further to see how we can continue to stretch and move more towards exceeding that growth standard. In mathematics, we are not meeting the growth standard. Even though 50% of our students are scoring advanced or proficient, it did not meet that growth standard. So like Hopewell, this is one data point we're looking at very closely at multiple layers to figure out what we can do, what has been done, and what needs to be done moving forward. Again, using that global data set to see how we can further make gains academically. At our high school, intentionally reinforcing here that our students throughout their educational process and experience show up to school with the support of our families in our community, which is commendable. And without that support, I'm not sure we could hit, well over 90% at every school. So thank you. We're continuing to offer our students the opportunities at career exploration at an extremely high level throughout the K-12 experience. Also a commendable note there. At our high school ELA, we have 17% of our students scoring advanced in ELA. And in mathematics, almost 85% of our students are scoring advanced. When you break that down further, you can see 84% of our students for ELA are scoring advanced and proficient when they get to the high school. And 93% are scoring advanced or proficient in mathematics. Most of those test takers are from 7th and 8th grade, impacting our Keystone assessment score here. So biology here is where we have an insufficient sample size. We do not have a data point at this time for Keystones for that assessment. Now, this was just a very general global look at the Future Ready Index. This is what people see publicly. And this is what compares us to other schools across the district. While it's helpful, we don't always get it very quickly. This data was from the spring of last year. But it is helpful to draw conclusions and move in a different direction if we have to. So at this time, building administration will take the opportunity, and we'll start with Dr. Chromiak and Mr. Mansfield.
Could I ask before? Sorry, it's
Yep,
Emily.
Yep.
Could I ask a quick question? Not to interrupt, but before you leave, I wanted to reference something you said.
Mhm.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
I didn't know it was coming from you. I'm sorry. I know you're
Yeah,
fine.
no, it's hard to find me over here. Not only am I short, but I'm in the corner. Sorry.
I know nothing about that.
Can I ask it now?
Please.
Just something. When you were saying, I appreciate you explaining the data, and this is an amazing presentation so far. And I
Well, the good
really
stuff's
love
really
the
coming.
breakdown, and so thank you so much.
Good stuff is really coming.
Good stuff, and
Mhm.
but it enables me to kind of ask the question because I can see it so clearly here. When you were saying that we have a lot of good things going on, and some of what we need to focus on specifically is in elementary and middle school levels, and these high school levels look great. I was just wondering if, as a part of your analysis, you took into account for the Keystones, biology being what it is, that are we taking into account that honors classes at the high school were told that they were required to take the Keystones as a part of their a part of a course requirement? They're required to take the Keystones even if they had waived it, or there was a year from COVID that you didn't have to, or you could get they were told that they needed to go back and make those up, but that the on level and lower classes were not given that same instruction. They could make it up through other means like SAT scores, et cetera, but the Keystones, which are great, but our high school specifically had and communicated as a course requirement for honors that they must take the Keystones, and the other classes did not if they could find another pathway.
Well,
So
there
there are other
multiple
pathways, which is
right.
great, yes.
Mhm.
But I was just wondering if that was taken into factoring into these scores or not.
It could have very well.
Okay.
Again, honestly, if you're in an honors or an AP course, you want those students taking the assessment.
Sure. Well, yeah, you'd want as many people who can
take them, right?
practice an
Right.
assessment as possible, and also as many to take advantage of a different pathway.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
And so it's available. The different pathways are available to all students.
Yes.
Okay.
Through Act 158.
Throughout what?
Act 158.
Through Act 158. So the
Yes.
different pathways. Okay.
Mhm.
I just wasn't sure if that was factored in. So thanks. That was my.
Yeah.
I think that was my one.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's okay. So Dr. Chromiak and Mr. Mansfield will take it from here.
All right. Good evening. Thank you, Karen. Dr. Trinkle. Okay. So I will kick it off. Dr. Trinkle did talk a little bit about our ELA scores at Hopewell. You can see that when we do a comparison in the next slide, last year was not our best showing. I'll say that for ELA. It was not a complete surprise. We did find that we had a lot more students who came into us as non-proficient readers and who were in need of academic interventions coming in. So we were well aware that we did have a high population of students who needed additional supports and interventions. And after we shared this, we'll talk about how we kind of drilled down and what we're doing this year about that. So just as a visual up there, you can see in previous years, we had, just looking at the colors, we had a much higher basic population in ELA. And when I say we drill down to the student level, we really looked at every individual student to see were they in academic interventions, and any student who had scored in that basic level, who was not receiving any type of supports was, when you look at the overall score of 1,000 being proficient, we had a unfortunate number who were so close. I mean, they were like 999, 991. So we really want to focus on, those kids who are, not to call them bubble kids, but the kids who are close and not receiving because they didn't qualify for academic supports. What we're doing in our tier 1 in the classroom for the teachers to focus on and kind of push those kids and move them forward. Math, we were historically about the same. Math was less of a drastic drop for us than ELA was this year, but same thing. We really drilled down and looked at the students, and for the most part, our students who were not proficient or advanced, or even a couple of our basics, were receiving math interventions last year.
Good evening. So you can see the Liberty Bell slides will look very familiar. I just changed the name on the top. Our ELA, we saw, as Dr. Trinkle said, 81.7 advanced or proficient. Our math was at 83.9. So we were pleased seeing those scores come through. And then we did the same thing, broke down over the last 4 years where we're at with those different colors and what we're seeing as the trend. And we stayed pretty steady with a little bit of growth from last year's bubble year of COVID. That was ELA. And then the same with math. We were sort of, pleasantly surprised to be rebounding a little bit quicker than we expected from pre-COVID, back to our pre-COVID numbers. So we're very happy with that.
Okay, so as Dr. Trinkle indicated, third grade, because it's their first year taking a PSSA, we don't get growth measures, like we don't get a PVOS score. However, we do have other data analysis measures that we use starting in kindergarten. We have STAR, which very closely aligns to what we're seeing our students performed at for the PSSAs, and Acadian's data. So I would like to say that although we did not have a higher proficiency level, looking at student by student on these other growth measures, we did grow all of our students. All of our students did grow, just not, unfortunately, to some of the proficiency levels we had hoped at Hopewell. So again, we do look at this data with our specialists, with our teachers, multiple times a year. We do a pretty deep dive into the data, looking at specific standards. Not only at Hopewell, but Mr. Mansfield and I both work together to say, what are some of the trends that we're seeing across standards, high, low? Are there curricular gaps? Are there, things that are happening at Liberty Bell that maybe are, different at Hopewell? What we have found is a lot of our standards that we have performed lower on were similar. And actually, which is why I'm very happy that we've started the process of implementing foundations this year, because that really was a low strand for all kids, for both schools. So I think, in the past, doing something like foundations used to just be an intervention type of thing, where now all kids in the entire school are getting that. And then our students who are in need of intervention are getting additional. So hopefully, with both the tier 1 and tier 2 or 3 interventions, we're going to see more growth with some of those kiddos this year.
So again, as Dr. Cormack and said, she and I work very closely together, and both being new administrators last year, we're really able to tackle a lot of these things that we saw as needs. starting with that tier 1 reading program review, which that work is continuing, looking at the MTSS process and how we identify kids that need supports and how we move those kids through the supports and allow kids to be in that tier 1 for as much as they can and support the teachers in helping kids in the tier 1. So we're not always just pulling kids out and moving them around. We continued ongoing training and implementing for foundations this year is ongoing. We did letters training. We used our instructional coach and our specialists to identify needs in our building to increase professional development, whether it was small group instruction, data analysis, what the STAR report teaches us on how that can drive our instruction. So our teachers were using STAR data and really doing small group instruction to target what areas kids needed growth in. Our instructional coach and specialists were working on math discourse lessons for our staff, our teachers. How do we bring more talking about math and problem solving into the classroom? We do host the regular data meetings, and then we were looking at comprehension and fluency in the older grade levels, grades 2 and 3. How can we build more of that in order to really produce great readers at the end of 3rd grade? So I think that is all for our presentation.
I just
Questions, and we invite you to come to our building. We are happy to host and let you see the great work that's being done.
I just had 2 quick questions. Sorry, over here. Thank you. It was very helpful, the presentation. Just one question. I think I've asked us from Dr. Trinkle as well before, but the STARS testing, I know that's done more frequently throughout the academic year. So can you just tell us how often that is done?
So all students take STAR testing in the beginning, middle, and end of the year, which we use as sort of benchmarking to see where they're at and where their growth is. Some of our students that we've identified that are in tier 2 or 3 with extra support take it every 4 to 6 weeks just to see how they're progressing along those standards.
And is that for, is that standard across K through, well,
That's K to 3.
K through 3.
Yep.
And then just as it progresses from there, is it still routinely given that frequently, regardless of grade level? Because I know
Yes.
and I'm looking at Dr. Trinkle as we
Mr.
start asking you
McGinty is
guys.
shaking his head.
But I
yes.
think the start, so, but it's similar, right? And I guess my other question is, I appreciate you laying out the additional steps. I'm just curious if there is, any kind of timeline that you have so that, I guess what I'm trying to get at is for us to see the results or to have you be able to have actionable results before the next round of the PSSAs, right? So it sounds like the STAR testing is one of them, right? That answers my question.
Right. So the
partially,
STAR
right?
is a good indicator. And we've just recently, Dr. Croman and I, we're looking at a report on the STAR. The 3rd grade proficiency assessment is this new sort of thing we discovered. So we're going to begin looking at that. We have a round of data meetings coming up because we will be giving the middle of the year STAR in January. And we are sort of wrapping up this 6-week cycle here in the month of December for data of tier 2 intervention. So we can gather how many of those kids can move out of tier 2. Because really research tells you should go 4 to 6 weeks before
Right.
you
So
move
there is
them
like
out.
a staggered timeline essentially to keep them moving up and you're charting it as you go.
Yep.
In addition to STAR at the K-3 level, we also have experience data, which really measures their, do they know their beginning letter sounds, their nonsense words, those type of really foundational type of skills that they need in order to build their fluency and comprehension. So we have that data as well. And that gets progress monitored every other week if they're in an intervention, or again, beginning, middle, and end of the year for all students. So we'll do all of that again in January. But for the kids who are already in intervention, they have multiple data points.
I've got 3 questions. The first one may be for Dr. Trinkle, but I just want to understand the context of career standards benchmark and what does that entail? And
that is definitely for Dr. Trinkle.
Yeah, you're not ready for careers at your schools yet.
They do start though.
They probably do, yeah.
They're, it's chapter 339. Actually, it's a regulation that we have to adhere to. And those are just the simplified standards. Like you just have to have a number of artifacts proving exposure to career exploration throughout the course of an educational career. Now, what those look like are dependent upon age and dependent on grade level. High school might look like visiting your business to see what engineering looks like. That could be an artifact for a student to job shadow or be on site at an engineering firm. What that looks like in 3rd grade could be a virtual trip and thinking about having questions about like what I want to be when I grow up. All those have to be collected and accounted for and uploaded for our, and it's part of our assessment. It's part of our scorecard, essentially. So
Okay,
that's-
so-
it's- yes.
Yeah, I've gone through that. And I
Yeah.
was going to say, now I understand where the word artifact came
Yes.
from over the past years.
Artifacts. Artifacts.
Okay, thank you for
there's
that.
a certain
So-
number per each grade band that you have to hit.
Okay,
Mhm.
thanks. And then the next thing is on your actionable steps. I just wanted to get a little more clarification. Dr. Chromiak, you and I have talked a little bit about these things, but the italics in the presentation that says overhaul, could you put a little more context on that word?
Yeah, overhaul is strong, but
Yeah.
you know, when we talk about kids being in multi-tiered system of supports, like what those supports look like, you know, there was not a very solid, clear reasoning for what constituted a student who was considered tier 2 versus tier 3, or how long they were in tier 2 before we looked at their data and moved them into tier 3, or just kind of kept an eye on them, and really just how we were keeping kids kind of just stuck in an intervention without saying, is the intervention working? How many data points are we looking at? How long are they in there? So really, we streamlined and really refined that process so it's very clear. And when we're looking at data now this year moving forward, we can say confidently, this is the intervention they received, this is how long, here's their growth or not growth, and what are we doing? And we have a much better way of collecting all of that.
Right.
So adding that feedback loop, if you will, too, right?
And I can say, like, you know, Dr. Serene, you mentioned sort of like, how do you know? So we just had data meetings a few weeks ago, and I know because I had a teacher say, oh, but I really don't think they're ready to come out of the intervention. You know, because we care about our kids and we get nervous. And my reading specialist said, they're leaving. That I don't know that would have happened. So that idea of no, they're ready. We know they are because we have the right process.
And then my last question, actually, you started touching on. So we have a particular year of students in a particular grade, let's say third grade. We've got some catch up issues based on the COVID incident. How is that generally followed and tracked to ensure that, number one, there is obviously an improvement to the next grade of kids coming into that same level, but then as those third grade students progress through and into intermediate school and onward, that we ensure that again, that catch up is really happening. I know there was a lot done in the school district over the past 2 years with respect to additional resources to do that, but ongoing. Do you have any comments on that?
We have meetings from third grade to fourth grade, transition meetings. So our specialists meet with their specialists and administration, and we really still talk about those kids and where they're at, what interventions they were in, what they received, and kind of what would be a good fit moving them into fourth grade, because likely the kids in third grade who weren't proficient are probably still going to be in some need of intervention when they get to fourth grade. So again, I think it's just that constant trying to close that gap.
Constantly looking at that information and the feedback loop and adjust accordingly, because I'm sure that there are parents in those grade years that are wondering, is my child going to catch up, or you know, the intervention has worked.
Right. And it is nice because all of the measures we use have fantastic reports that we can say, hey, here's where they're supposed to be and here's where they're at, but here's where they started and here's where they grew. So that's always something important to focus on as well.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question to that? Are you seeing like spatterings of children in each grade who are struggling, or are you seeing one particular grade? Is it pretty well throughout?
For Hopewell, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, when I look at the kids coming in, again, like we did last year when I said, ooh, this is kind of where we're predicted to be at proficient-wise, not too high of a number. That's a little alarming, and it was unfortunate that that's kind of what we saw as one of our outcomes. But
it's not one particular grade. It's in
at
each.
Hopewell,
Okay.
I am not seeing a particular grade.
Okay.
K1 right now is looking pretty good. My second and third grade is, we're really focusing on what they're doing. So
Emily, I'm just going to say my name now so you can find me. Thanks. I had a question unless I wasn't there. Okay. I love your explanation of growth because your explanation of it's easy to communicate and here's where they're, we'd like them to be, but here's where they were and here's the growth. So that's what school's all about. It's all about where did you come in? What do you need? And how can we grow you? So thank you for talking about that and explaining that. Kind of pulling on that thread a little bit. It sounds like a lot of that is done and a lot of repeated, for instance, STAR testing is done in tiered intervention. Is the same focus or the same lens of growth looked at above level, on level, but especially above level? So you're seeing, is there a focus to see at least a year's growth in a year's time? So if a kindergartner comes in, at a first or a second grade level, you would want to at least see a year's growth, if
We're
not
actually
more, because
looking
they're
for
already
more. We're looking for more than a year. Like research
right.
will say
Exactly.
kids should grow a year and a half. So the STAR SGP is the student growth measure.
Yeah.
What it does is it takes years of data across kids across the country. So if Johnny in kindergarten comes in and blows us away on the STAR test and is doing STAR in reading,
right,
it then compares him to other kids that
who were blowing it
reading
away
in kindergarten and said, did he grow as much as they grew?
Excellent. Thanks for that. So that's being monitored at an
So that's
individual
monitored
level.
across that.
Yep.
within a year, kids who are measured similarly across the country
Right.
should grow between this number and this number. And that is something that we look at for all kids to make sure they're at least hitting.
So Dr. Cormack referenced like the proficiency on STAR is 1,000 or on Pa.C.S is 1,000. So STAR has that rated score like an SAT. So a kid might in third grade score 880 in the beginning of the year and only 890 at the end of the year. But the STAR says, well, that's what everyone did that scored 880. That kid grew the way we expected or more than. Where a kid in third grade might only score 200 and then go to 600 and go, yeah, but all the other 200 kids went to 800. So you know what I mean?
Yes, I know
So
exactly
it's not
what you're
just those
saying.
strict data.
Thank you.
So our teachers actually have student performance measures that as a part of their evaluation on whether or not they grew their kids on
Okay.
that measure.
Okay. And I would, one other thing with that is that I'll pick on the STAR because we seem to be familiar with it. I do know historically the STAR, for example, is a timed tool so that kids who, especially those kids perhaps in tiered intervention, so kids who take more time or who have accommodations to allow for more time are sometimes thrown a curveball with that assessment because I'm wondering
So
if there
if
has
kids-
been a way to be, and I'm just letting you know that in the past, like everybody took it together. And so that wasn't always accommodated for. Has that now been
If
changed
kids
so that,
have on their IP or 504, we shut the time off.
okay,
You can't shut it off, but you can extend it and
extend it infinitely. So that's great that
Not
tool now allows
infinitely.
you.
Listen, we don't want to
Triple
infinite
the
it
time is
because
good enough,
here's
right?
the problem. We don't want kids sitting there
Right.
struggling with a problem they simply can't answer.
Correct.
And
Right.
making themselves feel bad because STAR will adapt to them. So if you answer that question right, STAR will give you a harder question. If I can't figure it out and I get timed out, STAR's like, all right, he ain't ready. We get a lower question.
Yeah.
So it's really not about judging them. It's about saying, okay, they didn't know that. So
Oh,
do
right.
they know that? Yeah.
I was just, it's kind of
there are accommodations that are able to be made. Yeah.
nice.
We are putting them in small groups. We're putting them individually. Similar to what we would do at the PSSA.
Yeah.
So if it's a kid that's typically distracted or has a 504 that says they can't take it with the rest of the class, they're not taking STAR with the rest of the class either.
That can be done for Acadians. That can't be done. Those are strict.
Maybe that's what I was thinking of as well. I know, I think
that are
it,
timed
I-
and that are-
yeah. And I think it used to be on STAR, but somebody discovered somewhere along the line what you're talking about, that key. And so it's wonderful that you're training that key. And it doesn't, as long as you're aware of it, that's all. But yeah, great. Thank you for answering those questions. And thank you for focusing on growth and explaining that so well.
All right. So I guess we turn it over to the esteemed admin team at the ILS. JPILS. I'll get that eventually. It's as far as you're going.
Just tap this one here. Okay. Good evening, everyone. The first couple of slides are growth measures. First one is our Future Ready and ultimately from PVAS. The academic growth score is out of 100. There are our growth scores. I think Dr. Trinkle showed a slide just like this. The next slide breaks it down by grade level. I'll take a second here to talk about all of the colors. This summary breaks each grade level down into five levels. The first one, significant evidence the growth standard has not been met, that is red. Moderate evidence the growth standard has not been met, that is yellow. Evidence the school has met the growth standard is green. Moderate evidence that the growth standard was exceeded is light blue, and significant evidence the growth standard was exceeded is dark blue. Overall, as a school, we're showing moderate evidence that we've exceeded the growth standard in math and significant evidence that we've exceeded the growth standard in ELA and science. According to this graph, our areas to improve are shown here in red and yellow, 5th and 6th grade math. We've seen areas of improvement or for improvement before in our growth in previous years. This year's data is definitely a success story. In 2019, our last 3-year rolling average for 6th grade ELA was showing significant evidence the growth standard had not been met. And this year, we're on the other end of the growth spectrum. So each of these is broken down again by grade level, ELA and math, as well as science, and then overall as a school. It's the overall school score that you see in the Future Ready Index. So the next 6 slides are data tables and graphical representations of achievement through e-metrics. So not growth, but literally pass rate, then broken down into advanced proficient, basic, and below basic. Starting out with 6th grade math, the achievement is slowly coming back from a lower score in 2021. Definitely different from our rolling average or our average since 2015. We saw a small increase, but again, we're nowhere near what would be 65%, which is our typical average. I used a 2017 to 2019 comparison to look at individual anchors, assessment anchors, in our metric data for 6th grade math, ELA, and so on. You could boil down the 6th grade achievement, the decline into the following 3 anchors. The first of which is understanding statistical variability by summarizing and describing distributions. That is a 6th grade anchor. For this current year, we had a rate of 46% correct. That is 17% lower than our typical, and was also our lowest percent correct for 21-22. The next one would be problems involving area, surface area, and volume. This was about 52% correct, about 15% lower than our usual average. And then finally, the next standard is broken down into larger chunks, or the next anchor rather, dividing fractions, common factors and multiples, and systems of rational numbers. And this would also represent our next lowest decline. We were 63% correct there, which is about 12% lower than our usual. Interestingly, our highest scoring was actually algebraic expressions in 6th grade. But you could summarize the decline in achievement just based on those 3 assessment anchors in 6th grade. And then here's the graphical representation of our achievement broken down into percentages, advanced, proficient, basic, and below basic for 6th grade math in the 2022 year. 6th grade ELA, again, I refer to this as a success story. A smaller difference in pass rate compared to a typical performance, or an average of about 84%. There were no single anchors in any of the analysis we did in e-metric that would have pointed to any increase or decrease in percent proficient and advanced. Again, a graphical representation here of 6th grade ELA. Our 5th grade math. 5th grade math, a smaller difference in pass rate compared to typical performance of about 71%. So we're not far off from what our typical has been. These anchors, or the anchors, could be broken down into 2 specific anchors that would have represented our greatest decline in 5th grade math. The first being operations and algebraic thinking. Our percent correct was 54% here, which is about 14% lower than our usual. And then finally, the dreaded geometry, graphing points on the coordinate plane, and classifying 2-dimensional figures. That anchor was also down to 54% correct, about 14% lower than our usual average. The 3 remaining standards saw very small declines overall, somewhere between 2 and 5%. And here is just the graphical representation of the 5th grade math numbers. 5th grade ELA. Typical performance, about 83%. 21-22 was pretty close to that. It was 81. No specific anchors or any decline seen when we drilled down to the anchor in E-metric, where we get our PSS8 data. Fourth grade science, 93 is right in line with our typical results. We've consistently spent 45 minutes each day on science in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, and I think all of the hard work in math and ELA definitely pays off in that particular test. There's a lot of reading. And then here is another graphical summary of fourth grade science. Fourth grade mathematics, it's actually 5% higher than our average since 2015, which was 73%. Obviously, no significant change or decline in individual anchors in fourth grade mathematics. And our graphical representation here, pretty close to one of our better years as far as advanced in fourth grade mathematics was concerned. And fourth grade ELA, again, just about our typical, slightly above actually at 82%. No significant changes in our anchors or reporting anchors for that particular test. So it's difficult to compare JPLIS in many ways because of our fourth, fifth, sixth grade structure. The closest comparison I can find, or the most reasonable comparison, would be to compare K-6 schools. So schools that include fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, but don't just have fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. So if we took a comparison of local K-6 schools, out of 30 of them, we were top two. As far as our Act 13 building score comparison is concerned. It's difficult to compare a K-5 school. Typically, the sixth grade test statewide in ELA and math is the most difficult K-6. So we really can't trade off one of the most difficult tests for one of the tests that students tend to do a lot better on. When we're looking at a statewide comparison, you can use the Future Ready Index to get this data, but there are 631 schools in Pennsylvania that have grades 4 through 6. Most of them are K-6 elementary schools. And if you use the achievement data from JPLIS as a filter, having pass rates above 60, 70, and 80 for math, ELA, and science respectively, combining academic growth scores above 80 across all areas, only four other schools total of the 631 meet the same standard as JPLIS. So the things that we're doing, we also use multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, STAR, Acadians, PSSA data review. What we do through our MTSS program, and it really is, I think, the backbone of what we do for students when it comes to building skills in specific academic areas, is deliver research-based interventions with fidelity, and we progress monitor every 4 to 6 weeks, similar to what the K-3 buildings had shared. PSSA E-metric anchor achievement review, regular data team meetings. We have a child study team and a student assistance program, or SAP. That is the end of my slide presentation. I'm open for questions.
Can you, this is Chris Wayock here. So what are we doing with fifth and sixth grade math? Because obviously that's where the big drop off was.
Right.
And it hasn't seemed to recover as much as, certainly ELA held steady, but there was a pretty big drop off in fifth and sixth grade math.
I think the important data for this year will be our next STAR assessment, because this data is old. What it's telling us is that the students that are currently in seventh grade and the students that are currently in sixth grade performed this way and with these specific anchors. I think when we see what we have with STAR in the winter, we'll have a better idea for where we are now heading into the next round of standardized assessments. Like I mentioned, when it comes to specific discrete skills where you would show a relative weakness, our tier one interventions, actually our classroom-based intervention, our tier 2 interventions through our MTSS program would focus in on those skills, both in math and ELA.
So when you talk about the challenges in math, I mentioned this before, that 38 seconds after a student is falling behind is the time that they continue to fall behind, potentially forever. And it all starts probably at this grade with some of those more advanced math concepts, right? So my question would be, what kind of, and we talked about feedback loops a minute ago. How do the teachers and in these subject matters go back to help to improve that catch up with respect to getting those students that are falling behind to help them to catch up? And how do they actually get to catch up? Because if it's significant, as we've had over the past 2 years, that falling behind, it's got to be challenging for you as a principal, and then all of the teachers in this particular grade set as well as high school, to be able to find creative ways to help the students catch up, because it is vitally important. And it can they actually catch up, I guess, is my final question there. And if you could elaborate, that'd be
Yeah.
helpful.
No doubt, I believe they can catch up. Math is difficult, I think, both in the way we approach it and definitely in the way we assess it. Those anchors that I was referring to, there can be a total of 10 questions that students will answer based on those discrete skills. So sometimes it's feast or famine when it comes to their achievement. I'm thankful that the state pulled back a little bit on the number of sections of math we take. So we're not testing for a month. But on the flip side, it really does create a tricky problem set and a tricky data set when it's based on 12 questions. I think our teachers do a very nice job with differentiated instruction after they present a whole group lesson, breaking down into smaller groups, working with students that perhaps did not achieve as high on a pretest, and then focusing on those specific skills. And that's in the classroom every day, needing no other systems of support, but just the great work that our classroom teachers do every day. I've seen teachers use one in particular, use Google Forms, Google Docs, where it's giving you live feedback on a review assessment, where a teacher can focus in on what may or may not be getting through, so to speak, and then pull those small groups of students aside to catch up, if you will, or just work on that one small thing that maybe is keeping them from answering a question or classifying a two-dimensional object, which is, geometry is new to a fifth grader, geometry is new to a sixth grader, or relatively new, as is, even though there are algebra and geometry standards in younger grade levels, the algebraic thought or that sort of concept, mixing numbers and letters alone is kind of mind-blowing when they get to that point. So it does take time, and truly, I do believe it's really it's dangerous sometimes to consider child development on just a linear progression. Not everybody does that. There will be peaks, there will be valleys, there will be plateaus, and then there could be explosive growth. And we see all of that and then some. So can they catch up? Absolutely. I think our classroom teachers just do amazing work every day because it's tough. Teaching sixth grade math, fifth grade math, fourth grade math is tough, as well as ELA. The ELA numbers, I think, are relatively more stable because we build strong readers in our K-3 buildings. And once you become a reader, it's something you can do just for fun.
I have a question. Sorry.
Thanks for that feedback.
So just looking back, just along the same lines as the last two questions, just the sixth grade PSSAs specific to mathematics. And I know you mentioned, the supports and the steps that you're going to be taking as a building, which sound fantastic. I'm just noticing that the trend has been ongoing for some time. There was a precipitous drop. Well, it was weird because 2016 to 17, there was a bump. But then it progressively declined in 2018, 2019, and then it just kept getting worse. So I'm just wondering, do you have any explanation where there are changes in the curriculum at that point? And because I hear what you're saying with the PSSAs, when you only have a very small number of questions and you happen to not, your confidence is shaken as a child and you're doing those problems, it's either you're going to nail them or you're not in certain situations. And I think it's stressful for kids to take these tests. So I'm just curious if there was anything specific that you know of, or has anybody looked at that as to why?
Nothing curricularly that I could. I mean, the test does change. It can be a bit of a moving target. The reduction in number of questions, from year to year, one standard or one anchor could be 7, and it could be could be 12 the following year, and that's a big difference, considering it's a 2-section test at this point.
Right, but it was like continuing. That's what I'm wondering if because I'm assuming that they put out their standards obviously for the year, and they're not going to tell you how many. They don't actually ever tell you ahead of time how many.
They give you a range.
They give you a range. But I'm just wondering because that's that's the only, a lot of things were up and down, it seemed, but this was one that I'm just seeing more of a trend. So I'm just curious if that's something maybe to consider. And I don't know, obviously you have a different breakdown in 6th grade of kids that are in the advanced math track already. And so I'm just curious it'd be interesting to know what the breakdown is and if there's any explanation, because it continued. That's the only reason.
I just want to amplify what you said before about moving 4 out of 600 districts, precisely where we expect and plan to be. I want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, Mrs. Webb. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into specific students as we go through this, just to give you a perspective on what our kids are doing and the growth that we're seeing. So where were we? A lot of the numbers and scores that you've seen so far is data from last year. That's where we were. Okay, the Future Ready, the PSSA scores, the Keystone scores, the building scores. So in terms of building scores, a building score is made up of a couple different factors. It's your academic achievement in math, ELA, and science, your academic growth in math, ELA, and science, and then your attendance rate for the middle school, graduation rate when you roll up to the high school. So in terms of our counties and the nearby counties, Southern Lehigh Middle School is 5th out of about 30 school districts. So that's pretty good. Okay, so comparing all those numbers, that's where we end up for the local area. At the same time, here are our 7th grade ELA and math scores. So in ELA, we scored 84.9% proficient or advanced. In math, we were significantly lower, only 52.5% proficient or advanced. And that's 7th grade, so that's our current 8th graders. In 8th grade, we were 74.7% proficient or advanced and in ELA, and in math, we were 48.5% proficient or advanced. And this is where it gets really interesting in middle school math. So in middle school math, we currently offer several courses that are advanced, all right? And on this slide, you can see the scores for our Keystone algebra data. So we had 92 kids last year take the Keystone in algebra, and 94.5% were proficient or advanced. So when we're looking at our math data, which was low in the previous 2 slides, we have to factor in that 92 of those kids also took the Keystone. So when you look at Keystone being a graduation requirement and PSSAs not being a graduation requirement, and where they're putting their effort and what they're focusing on learning and really being successful at, we're seeing that in the Keystone that they take in 7th and 8th grade. So in 7th grade, we currently have 52 students enrolled in Algebra 1, which is essentially 2 courses ahead. And we have 38 students enrolled in Extended Math, which is a 1 course ahead bump. In 8th grade, we have 50 students currently enrolled in Geometry, which is again 2 courses ahead. And we have 47 students enrolled in Algebra 1. So for next year, we have 99 students that will be taking the Keystone, or for this coming spring, that will then impact the high school numbers because our middle school students have already taken that. And as we can see by our proficiency here, they're super successful, okay? But that makes it tricky because it affects our math PSSA numbers. Our PSSA in science, these are the current 9th graders. So our 8th graders are the only ones in the middle school that take it. And we scored 75.3% proficient or advanced. And we also met the growth standard. So some of the things that we're doing in our science department include working really hard to address any gaps that they notice. There isn't a ongoing benchmark exam that can be used in science. So we don't have like an IXL or STAR for science. So they really focus on the CPO curriculum, the lab investigations, and the formative assessments and common chapter assessments that they use in class to really guide that instruction. And they're being very successful with that. So in terms of our academic annual growth expectations, in English, we're not growing as much. But if you recall from earlier, our English scores were significantly higher. So our achievement is 85-ish%, but the growth is not going as high. So when you look at those two numbers together, what it's telling us is that our students are achieving high, but we're having a hard time growing them that next little bit. Now in math, when this is looking at our PSSA data, we see that we've actually exceeded the standard of growth. So we've grown our math students who were lower significantly higher, but our math numbers were lower in those PSSAs. So we expect to see higher growth there. So that's a good thing. And then again, science is making the growth that they're supposed to, and we're having good scores in science for our 8th graders. So our ELA growth by grade level. Now this is just growth. This is not the actual achievement. And again, our achievement was high. So our growth is not as high as we would like it to be. Our students are growing, and I kind of broke it down there for 8th grade for you, so you can see the quintiles. But our students are growing not as much as we want in some of those areas. One of the things that we're doing to address that is that we are, even though K-6 is the main core of the literacy curriculum that they're looking at, our 7th and 8th grade teachers are working together with the K-6 program because we want to continue that literacy curricular growth as we move to the 7 to 12 zone. So we're working with them to find out and help choose things that then will help our 7th and 8th graders. Okay. Math growth by grade level. Here's where we see a lot of that growth. So we've got well above in our Keystone area. And overall, cross grade levels were well above as well in terms of significant growth. So that's really successful because that was our low number. That's what we're looking for. And last year we did have extra math positions in the building. We were doing more Title I work. We were doing a lot to focus on those math scores and improve them. And we saw this in our April testing. So you can see a little bit more about the math growth on this chart. So this shows us 2018-19, 19-20, 20-21, and then the 21-22 growth. And there's a big jump from the dip that happened after COVID in 2020, 2021 to this year's 21-22 growth. And that includes all of our students growing, not just some of the groups, which is really, really promising for us. Now, our math teachers are using the PSSA data. They use the IXL data. And they look at the gaps where they notice the students in front of them struggling, and then they address those skills together. They also are working on individual skills with students during our Spartan period, which is one period of the day where we offer some enrichment and interventions. And so that's really showing us that we're having the effect that we want to have based on the numbers. Here, again, we see that the ELA growth is not where we want it to be. Although our numbers are higher, we're looking at the student groups as being kind of flatlined. And that's why we want to look at the curriculum and see if there's things that we need to improve in the curriculum to make higher levels of growth. Because we have high scores, 80% proficient or advanced, but we're not making the jumps in growth that we want. And again, our ELA teachers are also evaluating that PSSA, IXL data, and looking at those skills for kids specific to the kid in order to intervene and offer supports. So one of the tools that we use very frequently is IXL. And the middle school teachers prefer the IXL over STAR because it gives us specific skills and lessons that we can build in on instead of just the big numbers and the standards. So this breaks it down more by skills. And I think 6th grade, some of the IS is using the IXL also. So this is a mastery chart. So the recommended goal by IXL is to make growth of 1 skill per week, okay? We are making a growth of 2.6. So we're exceeding what the recommended is from this national IXL standard. So we're very happy with that. And we're not only exceeding it in proficiency, but we have students mastering skills. And mastery is when they achieve, I believe it's 90 or above on the SMART score, and proficiency is 70 or above. So on this chart, you can see a lot of those skills that we've worked on. We've worked on 8,000, almost 9,000 skills specifically, and these are individual drilled down skills for the kids. So they're assigned a class-wide skill, which is the topic that's being covered in class, but they're also given an individual skill based on what that student needs. And we focus on that in both math and ELA. So they do it in class, and then we also work on it during Spartan period. And you can see that we're seeing results from this. This data is that ongoing formative data that shows us that what we're doing today is working. So you can see some of the growth here. In 7th grade, almost 90% of our students have made growth, and we now have 70% of our students on grade level where they're supposed to be or beyond for ELA, I'm sorry. In 8th grade, we have 70% of our students making growth, but we have 80% of our students where they're supposed to be or beyond. In math, we have 72% of our students making growth and 65% on grade level or beyond in 7th grade. In 8th grade, 75% of our students make growth and 80% or 70%, almost 68%, are on grade level or beyond. So this is the data that we're looking at on a regular basis to see where our kids are and how they're growing. So where are we going and what are we doing? During school, this is an image of one of our data walls. So during school, our teachers meet with our reading specialist and they look at each individual student's data and they look at what that student needs to grow, where they're currently at, and they're color coding on the cards as well as the little bubbles, if you can kind of see them on there, all represent a score for that student. So PSSA score is the color of the card. The now I have to remember this from my notes. The bubble dot is their score on STAR. And then next to that, you can't quite see it, but next to that is written their actual IXL score. And so the teachers can look at this and have a visual representation of exactly where all of their students are and who they need to focus on. In terms of student supports, what we do during school is we've reinitiated the MTSS program, the multi-tiered system of supports. We don't have quite the extensive staffing and program up and running the way that K3 or 4 to 6 does, but we are meeting as a team, looking at student data and finding ways to intervene. We also have child study and SAP. We do Project Success, which is a mentoring program. And we also have an academic lunch bunch that we run weekly in small groups for students. We do IXL twice a week that offers student-specific and class-targeted skills. Some of the teacher supports that we focus on are the data action planning meetings. So that's when teachers as a team or individually meet with our reading specialist and look at each kid's student data, and they look at the current data. So not just the PVA scores or the STAR or the IXL, I'm sorry. They look at the IXL and the STAR, not just the PSSA and Keystone scores. As a department, our teams meet together and look and work during professional development time to look at group trends and address them in class, and use that formative data to try and address all of the needs that they're seeing within a classroom or across grade levels and across different courses that are being taught. We've also revamped our Title I schedule to include more opportunities to meet with small groups and provide individual instruction for our students that are struggling and in that lower target area. And now we're offering more math-specific opportunities during our activity period. So students can opt into or be selected and recommended for a math-specific tutoring time during that activity period where they're met with a teacher that's focused on that course specifically. So what we're seeing, and this is my daughter's name, but what we're seeing, this is an example of the growth that we're seeing in students. So this is an 8th grader who in the PSSA in April was basic in math, but proficient in ELA. Then they came to us in September and took their benchmarks, and they scored a below basic in STAR, and the IXL was a 510, which is below basic also. Okay, now in November, when they did the most recent IXL, they've gone up to a 640 in IXL, which is a growth of 130 points. That's huge. We look for about 30 points a quarter. That's 130 in one quarter based on the interventions we're providing for this student in math. In ELA, they scored on the STAR, a basic in September. In the IXL, they had about a 630 and in September, but then by November, they've scored a 770. So they've grown 140 points in ELA. And this is really important to us because we can see the results of our interventions immediately with our students. These students involved in after-school tutoring. They also are part of a literacy seminar course, which is an 8th grade specific supportive ELA course that builds that extra skill set. And then their teachers working with our data coordinator to really focus and drill down the skills that they need. So after school, we offer a lot of different things. We're doing tutoring after school 4 days a week. We do science, math, and then a writing and English lab. And we've teamed up with the high school and some of the National Honor Society students there to come down and work with our students individually with the supervision of a teacher and guidance of a teacher, but to give that more personal connection. It builds some relationships and mentoring, and the kids have really enjoyed this process. We're also working on a scheduling committee. So we're looking at ways to build in more instructional time for math for ELA for next year. So that's something that we've been actively looking at. I've been in communication with other middle schools to see how they're doing it and trying to find the best way to build in those instructional minutes, ways to bring back teaming, which we lost, and the teachers really feel, and I agree, it gives us a chance to wrap around students and get to know them more specifically, and also provide more interventions that are tailored because you have a whole group of teachers focused on one kid. And then we're giving opportunities to personalize learning. So we've got many, many advanced courses, especially in math. We've got gifted programs. We've got a lot of different supports available through Title I and our special education program. And then we're offering many, many electives and music programs for our students to keep them engaged and really connected to our school community. And then just one more profile before we go. So this is a 7th grader and my son, Bobby. In the PSSA, he scored below basic in math in April and basic in ELA. Then on the STAR, when he came back to us in September, he was still below basic in math and only at a 370 on the IXL. However, based on our interventions, this student now scored a 530 in November. So they made growth of 160 points in 1 quarter based on those interventions and the teacher support. In ELA, the student came to us in September and scored proficient on the STAR, but the IXL score broke it down a little bit more, and we saw that they were actually only at a 390 but in September, but in November, they scored a 480. So they've made 90 points of growth in just 1 quarter over that time frame. And this student, again, the teacher works with our data coordinator. They do their individual data dives and departmental data dives to focus on their instruction. And then the student has also opted into some of our after-school tutoring opportunities. And I think that's it for me. Yeah. Okay, any questions?
I have a question. You said that you reinstated the MTSS.
We're doing like a modified MTSS based on the staffing that we have. So teachers can refer students to MTSS as a team. We collect data from all of the other teachers that have that student, and then we look at that data and work together to come up with a plan and coordinate with the teacher and the family to come up with a plan to support that student individually. So it's not as extensive as they have K-6, but we're trying to do more of it.
How long has that been?
Just since the beginning of the year, or when
Okay,
I started.
I was going to say, have you noticed
mid-October
a significant increase in how those students are doing that are being recommended?
One of the students from from our profiles was a student that had been referred to the MTSS team.
Is there a possibility of making that a little bit more robust if that's actually doing something for these kids?
I think so. That's part of our reason at looking at the scheduling for next year and the future is trying to figure out more ways to build opportunities for interventions and supports in that way. And that's kind of our long-term goal.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi. Thank you. I appreciate that you focused a lot on growth again, and also, working, losing my train of thought, a long day, and working with the curricular and the teachers at the IS as well to see how, you can kind of bridge that gap. But I actually had a question. I mean, it's interesting because the overall, the proficiency and advanced scores for both 7th and 8th grade is still significantly lower in math as opposed to ELA. However, looking at the growth, we grew more in math, however, as opposed to ELA, right? So I'm wondering whether in those conversations that you're having between schools, have you noticed or discussed that kind of trend? Because at 6th grade, we saw the diminishing scores in math, and then we're seeing the same thing in 7th and 8th. I'm wondering if there's any connection or anything that could be learned from it and grown from it. And I'm also wondering, are we not growing so much in ELA because we already do so well? And obviously we need to find a way to challenge, right? That's what that means to me. I'm just confirming with you because I've never looked at it in such in depth. So thank you all for doing this for us. So it sounds like we already do so well in ELA at the IS, and so it's hard to grow from there because you've already plateaued. And which is kind of not a bad problem to have, right? But then math, it's concerning to me that we still have that significant gap. And I hear your point about the keystones and those students choosing perhaps to focus more on the keystones as opposed to the PSSAs. But there's a far larger number taking those math PSSAs. So I'd wonder how much of it is truly based on that. I'm sure you.
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, it's about 50 kids per grade level. So that's
Okay.
a fifth of it's 20% of our population that are being highly successful in the keystones, but we're not seeing that carry over.
Being over tested.
PSSAs.
Can I take a crack at that?
Please
question?
do.
Or are they being
all
over
right.
tested? That's a lot of
Right.
testing in a short amount of time. So
I had two thoughts. First, we assume that the metric, the PSSA, has sufficient stretch to measure the full range of abilities of our students. So because a student is achieving at a very high level, well, there are other students who are achieving at a very high level. And if the assessment is appropriate, it should measure the growth of those people at higher levels. And therefore, we very much expect our top students to grow at very high rates. And to the extent that they're not, right? The other thing is, you're just seeing this for the first time. These data can be confounding. I looked at it a number of times and say, where is this pattern? And I myself I don't see it. And there may be some inconsistency. So there are limitations to data. I think the more, Mr. McGinty is drilling down to the core standards, looking at the data. We're looking at all different groups. That's good. But the extent to which we get more specific, we also lose precision in trying to come to determination. So your question is a very good one, and one that I had myself. And we can't read too much into it, although all the data is important. And we certainly expect every quintile to be growing at very high rates.
Deanna, just a quick question. Can you just clarify that those students who are in extended math, that they are still in the denominator though of the data
They
there
are.
for the PSSA,
Yep.
right?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
I just
a
wanted to clarify.
240, 35, 40 kids each take.
Okay.
Each grade level. Mhm. I guess my question is how, and I'm new to this this year, so I wasn't there last year for it, but how much they take the Keystone not very long after that, or within a couple of weeks of the PSSA. Where's the effort? How, Dr. Shreen said, are they tested out at that point, our top 20%? What's happening there? And that's a question that causes us to dig deeper.
Okay, a couple of quick things. First off, the length of time this strategy has been used, is this completely new now, or has it been in effect? Your
The MTSS
methodologies
strategy?
here for the middle school, has this been an ongoing way to analyze, or have you changed it at all at this point? I know you're very new, so I'm assuming it's been there.
There's been a lot
But-
that they've already been doing. So
Right.
the data action meetings were already happening. That picture of the color coded wall
Yep.
was already happening.
Okay.
The MTSS is new. Some of the tutoring is new. The math interventions during Spartan Black is new. And those are, I can't take credit for all of those. Those are the great work of the
Yep.
teachers.
No, I was just wondering how long it was in, so that's great. The next thing is, and to tune in on this growth definition. Okay, if I were to stand at one end of the room and my limit or the goal is the other side of the room, and I take certain steps, the ratio of me getting to that wall is very high, and the growth or the getting to that point is very good. But once I get to the end of the room, the amount of growth is limited based on some of these other factors. So, I think the definition of growth, especially for the general public, is to really understand what that is and how that correlates to these other things, because growth can be defined in many different ways. And these numbers and these trends, as Dr. Mahone said, can affect the way you would perceive the amount of growth. So I think that's an important point for people to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
If I keep taking half the distance to the wall and I keep taking half the distance, I'll never get there. but it'll be much smaller each time that I take half that distance. And that's, I think, the problem with looking at just growth. Is
Mhm.
that true, or? am I
Absolutely. That's a
off
great way to
base?
describe it. Yes.
Okay.
Emily came in here. I had two quick questions, actually, both kind of about funding in a way. I heard you mention intervention and trying to find more time for that in tutoring programs and optional programs to help after school. Has there been exploration, or is there a possibility of finding funding for an after school activity or tutoring or something bus? Has there been
Oh,
any
for a
pursuit
bus.
for a bus to get, because it's my understanding that there isn't a late bus, therefore any kids who needed to take or would want to take advantage of any of this after school additional tutoring and programming would need a ride, which is a shame because I mean there were points in my career where I could not, and I'm sure there are others like that out there. So is there any investigation about the possibility of, through Title I funding or some other funding, working on that? That was my question. And if yeah, great. So working on that is a great answer. Thanks. And my second question with funding, I remember us seeing and talking about IXL at different points in different district buildings. Was there a reason why it was stopped in certain buildings, or it's not a continuity? Is that a funding thing, or is that an educational, this is what it's built as? Because it sounds like you're really getting great results. So was that a funding choice or a continuity of what IXL offers at different grade levels? Why the hiatus at different buildings and different grades?
I think that it's being used 4 to 6, a lot in 6th grade, and I think it tends to be more beneficial with those older grades. And then 7 and 8 uses a lot. The high school uses, Josh will be able to talk about more of, I think they use Study Island somewhat, more of what they use there, but it just depends on what is applicable. STAR only gives us the beginning, middle, and end of the year scores.
Right.
The IXL gives much more current data. So that's why as a middle school, we tend to rely on that and look at specific skills that kids need and use that to guide us.
Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it.
When I heard IXL, I did that in the 2nd grade during COVID, the 3rd grade. I got like PTSD when you mentioned it. It was brutal. So maybe, to your point, I guess the point being, I agree with you. I personally have not utilized IXL at the other grade levels, but at the elementary grade level, we'd get like towards the end and it would kick you back. And then
that
it
happens
would
at
do
the
that
upper
to me,
grades.
like,
It is
not me,
extremely-
possibly my daughter. It's not as if I were trying to help her in any way. But it kept kicking me back. She was better at it
And
than I
if
was.
as you
But it
get
was very,
closer
very-
to the goal,
Yes,
you get
trying to
one
get that
wrong,
goal with stars
you
or
drop
something.
10.
Brutal.
But as you get closer, you only gain in 2s.
Yes. You feel my
You might-
pain, Dr. Sir.
Yeah, you might consider this effective, but the kids absolutely abhor this because it is so devastating. I'm going to be done my homework in 5 minutes, and now
we're
I'm going
not
to be
done
done in
with it yet.
55 minutes. It's
I'm
kinda,
still living it, Dimmick.
I will say, even that time data gives us information because we can see how much time the kids spend on that skill. So if they accomplish a skill and they master it in 4 minutes, 5 minutes, they've nailed it in class.
right. Then you don't only have to counsel them through the PTSD the next day. It's great.
But if not,
No, I don't know about that. But yeah, no. Thanks for that explanation. And good to hear that, Mr. Dimmick, I do recall it being an elementary skill as well. So I was hearing it in different buildings. So I was wondering what that, brutal. All right.
all right, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Miller.
Good evening, everyone. So in regards to the high school, we're a completely different entity when you look at data, when you look at how we assess our students, solely for the fact of we've moved so far away from the heterogeneous grouping of students to the homogeneous grouping of students based on academic level, interests. So we do things a little bit differently in our assessment. But the first one I do want to point out is our building level score. We did score 4th in the surrounding area. And unlike some of the challenges that Mr. McGinty had and Mrs. Webb had, high schools are 9 through 12. So it's easy to do a great comparison for what's being taught in terms of academics. Of course, size does vary greatly in our area. And we did go a little farther in evaluating other schools across the state that have very, very similar demographic in terms of the actual population size, free and reduced lunch, economic special ed, and we do compare very well to them in those categories. But for our local area, we were fourth in the building level score area. I'm going to talk about keystones, our Algebra 1, our Bio, our English. These are the scores that are very easily seen, talked about in many lengths. And the data can be very deceiving here for the fact that when you look at Algebra 1, 92 students have already been taken out of this data group because they took it at the middle school in 7th and 8th grade. But then their data is reincorporated when we do the building score for the 11th grade cohort. So it's in and out, in and out. So while this data is giving a good representation of where our students are and that we are achieving and we are still feeling a little bit of that COVID bubble, I think our trend is starting to start going in the right direction by what we're using at the high school in terms of I excel at the high school level in math, which fits our students' needs much better. And when we come to English and biology, Study Island fits our needs. In regards to biology historically has always been one of the toughest challenges in the Keystone testing. It is extremely content heavy. There is never enough time to get through all the content. And as Mr. McGinty pointed out earlier, the test shifts so greatly from year to year with our topics. One year there's 12 questions on ecology, next year there's only 2. And then there's 9 questions on genetics, and the following year there's only 1. So when you try and predict and work through that, you make educated guesses, and sometimes our best educated guesses for where to focus with our students while using data are good. They just don't match up to where they should be. ELA is our strongest. This is definitely where we're seeing our most consistent growth and success. And again, when you talk about growth for the high school in these 3 areas, it's so hard as well because we've already started grouping based on homogeneous interests where students lie. And we have some students that have so high, there is no room for growth. They're exceeding so well. I think some of the points that show this are when we go to our actual building level data. Our building level data shows things I think we can be proud of as a community, as a school district. Our graduation rate is exceptional, staying in the mid to high 90s with our 4 and our 5 year. And that again just shows where students are at the end of their career here. And when we look at further education, we are putting students out there into higher level colleges, into high institutions. And we have students already admitted to great institutions like Princeton, North Carolina. They're going local like Penn State, and they're even looking at L-Tri-C to help take care of costs and then get into places like Clemson and Seton Hall. So we're doing great things to prepare our students for that next level. And I think one of the 2 greatest things that we do at the high school in terms of showing what we are doing academically is our national merit and our SAT scores. This year especially, we have 7 students qualified as semifinalists. The national merit is one of the best, I would say, national measures. They give out anywhere between $28 to $29 million a year in scholarships, and this is extremely competitive. We had 7 students this year qualify as semifinalists and working their way up to the finalist status, and we had 7 commended, and this is the highest we've had in the last 4 years. So our students have really demonstrated that they are achieving at high levels and doing great work. As for SATs, we're staying very consistent with that 575 and that 580 range. This is one of the top, I would say, top 5 scores in the Valley in terms of SAT scores. Our students are doing excellent on national scores that show where they are in college ready. But I think one of our highest achieving individual building scores that really excel and show what our students are doing is basically our 4-year flop in terms of AP scores. We've gone from students scoring mostly 3s and 4s in 2019 to now our students scoring 4s and 5s on these college boards. And we offer 21, which is the most in the Lehigh Valley. So for a school of 1,000 kids to offer the most APs, have them run consistently every year and students to see these scores. We have teachers who are excelling at getting students to find their interest, their passion, whether it's in the arts, humanities, or STEM, and get into understanding their career choices for college or get career choices afterwards. So these AP scores, I think, really demonstrate where our students have gone and where we are going consistently. And as Dr. Mann has said so many times, with breaking barriers and getting our students ready, our dual enrollment has greatly increased. And we've seen a flux, and we're looking at tracking the data more consistently, but we're seeing students really start to take advantage of how can I get college credit? How can I prepare myself? How can I understand what college is out there? How can I be ready? And dual enrollment is giving these kids a great look into it. We are looking to expand some of our course offerings from University of Pitt and L-Tri-C, continuing to move forward so that It's not just with AP and honors classes, but with academic classes. So all students have the opportunity to take college level credit at an affordable cost and move forward to a next level. And all those things I think lead to what we're talking about in actionable steps. And again, it's so different at a high school because we're looking at how are we getting them prepared once they graduate? What are they going to go on to? Will they be successful? We've reintroduced a writing and a math lab for the upcoming school year using ESSER funds. We do have a biology lab to help with the Keystone focus so our students get a nice area of understanding for where they might struggle. Our NHS tutors are doing an excellent job, not just here, but also at the middle school with connections to students. We are rerunning the Winter Keystone. I know it came up earlier about the pathways. I truly believe that we need to pad pathways for our students and give them as many options as they can to qualify. I'd rather have a student qualify for 5, 6 pathways instead of putting all of our eggs in one basket. So Winter Keystones is a good way for them to understand. Also students to feel level of achievement that they may have just missed the mark on that first time, but they took another shot at it and passed and did success. Our AP courses, again, are demonstrating what a great academic area we have and how our students are achieving. And lastly, our dual enrollment has gone a long way towards helping our students grow. Pretty much it for the high school. Is there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. This is all very academically oriented, which is great. The other question I have is on the other side of the coin. I'm on the Joint Operating Committee at LCTI. So just on that front, with regards to other career opportunities that may not be in the upper percentiles, what are your thoughts there and where we're headed and what we may be doing in the future?
So obviously one of the best things we have, and that was shown earlier in Dr. Trinkle's part of the presentation, was our career at Chapter 339. We're doing more, I'd say, in the past 2 years, looking at data for having more students take interest in LCTI moving forward. Right now, the projection path is on anywhere between a 90 to 93% job placement rating for those students and moving forward. We're really making a harder push for our 9th and 10th graders to get in for the fact if they can get into the co-op world. And we've seen a little bit more of an expansion in our co-op placements these past year with our seniors. Last year, there was about 6, I believe. I know this year there's at least 14 kids already in co-op placement for the fall semester, where they're working anywhere between 30 to 40 hours at Decca Battery, other places around the area, getting real good job experience and working towards full-time placement upon their graduation. You're welcome.
Hi, Emily Gibbon. I had a question. It's great to hear about the high flyers at the high school when they get there and whatever the success and the achievement there. This is a wonderful kind of a capstone to the presentation tonight. I've heard reference throughout different folks. I can't remember who. I think Dr. Trinkle led with it. And I know Ms. Webb just with her presentation talked about like the Future Ready Index with regard to attendance and how, for instance, Ms. Webb referred to focusing on a motivating and welcoming environment through like extracurricular programming and music and MTSS and that team approach of wrapping around kind of a thing. And we have so many great extracurriculars at the high school, and it sounds like kids are taking advantage of all of the wonderful things we have to offer. I wonder if, just because this was so much of a focus on those high flyers, I wonder if we have any data about building data focusing on if there's a breakdown of attendance with those identified as needing kind of, I guess, I realize you don't do MTS at the high school, but is there a breakdown of attendance or kind of a read? Because the scores don't necessarily provide that on you mentioned it was such a heterogeneous grouping versus a homogeneous grouping in your building. Is there any breakdown of data to kind of indicate how those students, even as simply as through attendance and what the attendance rate is for the general school population versus those students who are in need of remediation or extra help or a little extra? Is there any sense of what we're doing it's great to hear about the high flyers and we need to focus on that. Is there any information about how we're focusing or how the trending or growth has been for those who aren't necessarily hitting those AP high flying dual enrollment kinds, and how welcoming or how, obviously our high flyers feel they have AP courses and they have all these opportunities. Is there a sense that we have that those students who, and as Mr. Mon mentioned with pursuing a career, that those folks are also kind of high flying or they feel their attendance is up, and it's a great environment for them as well to achieve in their areas of success?
Yeah. So what Dr. Trinkle showed earlier was our attendance rate. We average anywhere between like 94 to 95% attendance per year.
Yeah.
And if we actually break that down and look at our LCTI students usually have an attendance rate of between like 96 and 97% actually. So they're constantly going. They want to be there. They love going there. And we're really expanding on that and working with them. They've just done some academic changes up there as well with their administration, and they're making it a much more expansive environment as well, which is great. In terms of our students who aren't always the high flyers, I think one of the biggest pieces of data that we just were able to find later on was when we did a comparison with other schools of our size, like a Twin Valley, Palmyra, Hershey, and I'm talking about schools that almost mirror us across the state. We actually were running 90.5% on graduation with placement in either a work-based career, an actual going to a community college, a college, or actually going into an actual work-based environment with military placement. So we're at like a 90.5 based on our actual data that we gave to the state and got back from the state at a later point. So in reality, when I think about 90.5% of our seniors going off into a full-blown career of either being LCTI training or military placement or having a 40-hour career job or college, that's a very high rate, and it's higher than some of the other schools in the state that match us independently. So, and we are working to push more as well with PA Career Link for those students to go off and get actual training. We just started a brand new club at the high school, the STEAM Club, where those actually working with the MRC, and we're talking about those students going off and getting legitimate career training and education, not just going out and getting a 4-year job. They're going out and working with Braun and getting training to start at the low level and work their way up and getting full paid training. Some of the careers that they have set up and worked with the MRC, students are looking to get a $50,000 salary at the age of 18 with paid training, with the opportunity for promotion, and with the opportunity for additional training later year or college payments on their own. So they're not just taking all on their own at the age of 18.
That's great. And I realize through your explanation, I actually phrased my question horribly. So I'd like to go back on that. I consider that everything you described there, I consider those students to be our high flyers as well, regardless of your path after.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know you did through your explanation. So I consider those kids, when I referenced, people who sometimes have different paths or fit differently into the high school preps, sometimes that's a harder path to find because it's, and I'm glad that those pathways are being provided, but I do consider our LCTI students to be our high flyers, as well as our students who are, who are achieving great on national standardized tests to be our high flyers. I guess that 95% graduation and placement and attendance and everything else is great to hear. And at some future, not to extend this, but at some future meeting to look at a breakdown perhaps of those kinds of stats with students who maybe aren't hitting those high flying. Because I heard a lot of, for instance, and I'm more focused, I'm an elementary educator, so perhaps my mind thinks more that way. But I heard a lot of like, all right, so the kids who aren't necessarily, who are in tier 2 and 3 intervention, we're still looking at them and growing them and seeing that their attendance isn't dropping off. So we're comparing those numbers. So if we have a 95% attendance rate across the school body, and we also have a 95% attendance rate with those kids who are being pulled for extra services, be it, I know MTSS doesn't exist in the high school, but those kinds of things, fantastic. But if we're looking at 80% attendance for those, kind of, that's my only question. Do we have
So-
any data like that to indicate?
No, and honestly, I don't think there is that breakdown in data because the way, again, the high school is structured in that we're so open with options for students to find the career path that they're actually passionate about. That overall attendance rate really does show us that students are coming to school because we are providing a pathway, whether it is LCTI, whether it is military, whether
So
it
you're
is
seeing it
career.
balanced.
So we're seeing a great balance, and that's why I think we're getting the students to come in and have that such a great rate. And while we've never broken it down that way, that overall data does show that we have students who want to be in the building, that are finding a pathway, that are finding a career choice that really calls to them, speaks to them, and they're finding that they want to be here, be a part of this community, and then extend beyond that once they leave our walls.
That's good to hear. Thanks.
Josh, I just have a quick question. The biology scores. So looking back even from 2018 to 2019, so this is all pre-COVID, it looked like the basic was increasing, advanced was decreasing. Even the trend that we've seen continue was even starting back then. Can you expand upon any of your thoughts there? I know you mentioned briefly some of the changes in testing, but there's clearly a a very clear trend, not in a positive direction.
So there actually was a test modification made in the COVID year that was never truly seen, and then it came out the year afterwards when students came off COVID. So I think our teachers are starting to get a handle on where that change is. The other wrench that's coming into this is that the state just passed that new legislation where in 2025 the NGSS standards must be fully encompassed into everyone's curriculum, and NGSS standards so much more on the application and the demonstration of skills versus the content knowledge that's currently on the biology exam. So there could be a whole other change in 2 years with this data or how this test is done. I know our teachers have looked really hard at this data and figured out how the new test has been modified since 2020, and they've made adjustments with the curriculum that we have in place right now. So hopefully we're going to see a different trend moving forward.
Thank you.
Is that the lab that you mentioned?
So the biology lab is to help our students with their focus on their retake especially, but it's also something we want to have in the spring so students understand where they are and clean up on topics. Again, there's 8 core topics of biology are so extensive and so content driven that students just need refreshers later on in the year. So to give them other opportunities to get it beyond the actual classroom is where we have it.
One other real quick question. I noticed that both Seton Hall and Pitt, I think in enrollment and dual enrollment had gone down. L-Tri-C had gone up. Can you
I can gladly explain on that. So 2 things happened with Seton Hall. Seton Hall, a lot of their courses do match AP courses, and students have made choices of, do I just want to risk everything on the AP exam, or do I want to pay a little bit more and guarantee the credits? As for Pitt, because of L-Tri-C's expansive offerings, we now have courses that qualify in Pitt, L-Tri-C, and Seton Hall so that students have their choice. So we're kind of picking and choose, students can pick and choose where they want to go with it. So some students know very well the L-Tri-C credits are going to transfer to where I want them to go for my 4-year college. Others know Pitt will transfer more effectively. Others know Seton Hall is where I want to go. So we do have a transfer availability window as part of our dual enrollment on our online program studies that allows people to go on and do a future look at, okay, which course should I register with which dual enrollment for potentially transferring those credits and getting them in and getting sure I can get those credits in to my new college.
Thank you. What percentage of students who are taking a course that is eligible for dual enrollment are actually following through with that dual enrollment? Do we know?
Right now, so I would say we're about anywhere between 40 to 50%. So we still have some students that still don't choose not to do it for a multitude of reasons. Some of them are offered at early ages, like 9th and 10th grade, and students say, I don't know, I'm not sure, even though they've been very well briefed on it. Our senior class is definitely the heaviest group with taking the advantage of dual enrollment, and mostly some of our juniors as well.
So I think, so just a related question to that, I think some of it is confusion or lack of clarity, and not saying from our part as a district as to whether or not those credits are going to transfer. And I know that there's access, on the website to kind of help figure out, but I still think it's confusing and hard to know for anyone whether or not the credits would transfer as opposed to AP courses where there's a little bit more direct correlation, right? But is there wide variability between the 3 institutions with respect to transfer? I mean, L-Tri-C is it less expensive?
So L-Tri-C is the cheapest and
Right.
does transfer, and then Pitt's second cheapest. Seton Hall is the most expensive.
Right.
I would say our Pitt and L-Tri-C credits are the most favored in terms of
Applicable.
transferring to other
Okay.
4-year institutions as well.
Okay.
I just want to take a minute and thank all of our building administrators. Took a lot of effort, and I appreciate you for being here and taking a look at this information. And one thing that I just want to share briefly before I have Dr. Sometto come up is that the version of this is taking place and has been taking place with our teachers, with our educators. So it's not a performative exercise. This is something that we're doing all the time with our staff so that we can make adjustments that are necessary. So I turnabout is fair play. I have Dr. Sometto here, who was just recently board approved as our Director of Curriculum Instruction. She's just going to very briefly highlight some of our upcoming focus areas in 22-23. She's going to take us home. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Trinkle. And thank you to all of the building administrators for that in-depth look at the data. I just, I want to say from a perspective of somebody who's very new to this role, new to the district, but not brand new to the district. I've been here, I would say, since about the beginning of the year. Data is important. We need to pay attention to it, but data doesn't tell the whole story. We all know that. And so as somebody who's been in a lot of classrooms, more so at the K-4 level, but across the board, we just have the best teachers. We have the most dedicated staff. We have teachers that really are willing to do what's necessary to help kids make growth. And whether that means a little bit of momentary discomfort to make that happen, learning something new, a change in philosophy, teachers here are willing to do that for the benefit of their kids. So again, the data is important, but certainly I think it's worthwhile getting into classrooms. If you haven't recently, you will be amazed by what you see. So looking ahead to the remainder of this school year, some of the focus areas that I know that I have on my agenda collaboratively with everybody else, and of course going forward beyond that, we are looking at that K-6 ELA curriculum, aligning that with best practice. This science of reading, of course, is all over the media. So it's in discourse, not just in educational communities, but in the public. And so we are going to do our best to make sure that we choose a curriculum that best matches research. Again, taking that philosophy shift, taking what might be momentarily a little bit more work, a little bit more of a heavy lift, but doing what we know is best for kids going forward. And I think that choosing the right curriculum is not only going to benefit our elementary readers and writers, it's going to benefit those children as they go up the grade levels. So some of those score deficits that we might be seeing in the middle school level or upper elementary and middle into high, hopefully some of those scores over time, we start to see those improve because of this improved foundation that we are building for them in reading and in writing. So I'm very excited about what's to come there. Of course, that comes with professional development, coaching, making sure that our teachers feel like they are prepared, that they're given the training that they need to successfully implement and create readers and writers, mathematicians, scientists, across the board, all content areas that can go forward and be successful and leave us in 12th grade and be successful as well. So then that kind of goes into that third bullet there about the writing instruction, kind of, we can't forget about that. That's a big part of literacy. And then of course, we had a lot of discussions this evening about the math and the science, how we see some dips in those scores. So taking a closer look at that, looking at specific anchors as our administrators spoke to, and just looking to see what can be done specifically there to try and close some of those gaps and create successful students, which I know is our aim across the board here. So thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you.
We all appreciate the effort you put into those presentations and your time to explain all of that to us and the public. Do we have any visitor comments? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn? Is everybody in agreement? Okay. You're not going to argue about it? Great. Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you to the board tonight. Great questions.